Okay, good afternoon everybody. In terms of what we're going to go through is a whistle-stop tour of Green Deal, so just an overview of the whole process. The presentation itself is pretty complete and exhaustive, but what I plan to do is sort of move away through it and hopefully get to a point where by the end of this hour session you've just got a better understanding of what Green Deal's about in terms of the overall offering and where it is. From an introductory point of view, we're going to talk about Green Deal, a little bit about MCS, which is the Microgeneration Certification Scheme, because the two work sort of hand in hand. The current situation relating to Green Deal, the measures involved in Green Deal, which are the technologies that we're allowed to install under the Green Deal environment, the standards that operate around the scheme, so the criteria through which organisations have to adhere to in order to deliver against Green Deal and working in and around that environment. A little bit of information in terms of the government consultation that surrounds Green Deal, so understanding the fabric of regulation that sits behind it, and then the challenges faced with installation businesses becoming approved, which is the fundamental reason why we're doing all this network stuff, and the rest of it is to engage with small businesses and enable these companies to get involved in Green Deal, which is really, the whole process is undoubtedly much easier for a large scale company than it is for a one-man band, and much of this network is about all of us being able to give these guys the tools that they need so that they can move forward and deliver Green Deal and compete with the big guys, so to speak. I'm not going to spend the next hour reading PowerPoint slides because that would be boring, but I am going to read this one because it's the government pledge. The Green Deal is the coalition government's flagship policy for improving the energy efficiency of buildings in Great Britain. It's a new market framework and is based on the key principle that some energy efficiency related changes to properties pay for themselves in effect through the resulting savings on fuel bills. The Green Deal will create a new financing mechanism to allow a range of energy efficiency measures such as loft insulation or heating controls to be installed in people's homes and businesses at no upfront cost. The Green Deal will be available from autumn 2012. All of this is absolutely true and correct, apart from this bottom section, because it's been sort of well noted that the Green Deal has continually failed and been held back, and the launch that initially happened in autumn 2012 was renamed a soft launch because it wasn't ready, and the real launch happened in January 2013, but it still wasn't ready, so they called that a managed launch. And the official launch has now happened in June, July time. To press, 9,000 Green Deal assessments have taken place, which is significant. So a number of assessments on people's properties to identify whether consumers are able to draw down the funding and deliver Green Deal work on their properties. Well, lots of those have been done, but at the moment only 4 Green Deal plans have been completed. So across the whole of the UK there are currently 4 consumers in receipt of a complete Green Deal. 2 of those are journalists and the other 2 are directors of Green Deal providers. So it's fair to say that there are still a number of problems and issues in relation to Green Deal and its ability to move forward effectively, which is creating a challenge. And from a cynic's point of view and from a business point of view, is a big barrier to wanting to jump into such a scheme, because if only 4 have occurred and we've got numbers of businesses that are dealing with us and wanting to enter into a scheme which at present unfortunately is failing, that's a difficult scenario. There is a light at the end of this tunnel, which is energy company obligation, and I'll come on to that briefly, which is the primary reason why businesses will want to enter into this. So Green Deal, government initiative implemented by DECC, Department for Energy and Climate Change, and it's a scheme giving consumers access to finance for installing energy efficient measures. First and foremost, this is a finance agreement. It's nothing more than that. It's a loan against the installation of some product into a property. The difference is that it isn't secured against the human being. It's not the person that's applying for this credit, it's the property, and more accurately, the electricity bill. So the finance agreement actually attaches itself to the electricity bill on any given property, for any consumer's property, in order that they can have this work activity actually carried out. And that's the way that the the primary process works, and the advantage of that is that by attaching it to the electricity bill in a consumer's property, it first off removes the credit rating requirement to some extent. There's still a credit rating check that carries out against any given consumer, but because 99.2% of everybody in the UK pay their electricity bill, it's actually very secure finance, so it doesn't need the same level of credit check, which is quite welcome in a marketplace where financiers have a real difficulty lending money to people. It all works on something called the golden rule. If you imagine a scenario whereby with a customer and there's a boiler in the customer's property and it's not working as effectively as it should, they could do with a new boiler, it's paying up. By virtue of going through an assessment regime, so there's something called an energy performance certificate. You may have heard of it from the days of home information packs and this sort of thing, and also any landlord in property has an energy performance certificate done, and if any of you have moved house in the last few years, you'll have had to pay out for an energy performance certificate on your property. What this document does is carries out a check of the fabric of the property and sees how efficient it is in essence. So this is the thermal efficiency of this property. If we've got a boiler that's not working particularly well, this assessment shows this up and says, okay, well, it's not a particularly good property and it could be like this. So this is what we've got today, but if we were to do this, this and this to the property, we could save this property numerically a significant amount of money. So on this working example, what we've got is, if we imagine that the existing billing structure for this consumer is £1,000 a year, this is what they pay at the moment to run their heating process. We've done an energy performance certificate, we've identified the fabric of the property, and we've also spoken to the customer about their billing and what they pay and how much it costs them to run this property. We can now do some forecasting, because the energy performance certificate has some detailed tools within it that allow us to forecast savings from putting in new measures. In this instance, it's a boiler. We've determined that if we take out this old boiler and we put in a brand new A-rated efficient combination boiler, we can save this customer's bills. We can knock it down to £500 a year, because it's an effective boiler that's going to save a huge amount of money. By us doing this, we're saving the customer £500 a year also. So they're now paying £500 a year and they've got this new boiler. The situation is this: our customer doesn't have the financial wherewithal to pay for the appliance, can't necessarily get the credit to pay for that appliance, and this is really where Green Deal can step in. Or it might just be a choice, you might just choose to have a Green Deal. You might have money in the bank and just not choose to spend it. But under this initial assessment, we've determined that if we install this new appliance, we can save £500 a year. That's great. What we can now do is Green Deal can finance into this gap. So we can say, okay, we'll finance that job. You won't pay any money for this installation. Let's say, for the sake of argument, it's £2,000 to install a new boiler. So we can finance against this annual saving against each of the measures we're installing, not beyond the warranted life of the appliance that we install. So for central heating boilers, as a working example, the warranted life of those boilers is a 10-year period. So the financial agreement would allow us to offer a customer a 10-year finance package that pays for their new boiler installation within the fabric of these savings. So if we were to split that out in simple terms, a 10-year finance agreement over a £2,000 investment cost, we're paying £200 a year. So what we do is we slot the £200 a year cost into that savings. So instead of the customer now saving £500 a year, they're saving £300 a year. So they're still making savings on the new appliance, but we're just using a little bit of the savings to pay for the installation of the measures. So the upside of that is the customer is not putting their hand in their pocket. There is a fundamental and significant cost involved in installing it, but that's living within the fabric of the savings, so it's not being recognised, it's not being seen, so you don't feel like you're getting hit with it by a customer, but we're getting a new, more energy efficient product without necessarily paying out for it. And because it's not sensitive against the credit rating, or as sensitive, it's less likely to refuse a customer credit, because Once this is approved and runs through the whole provision, it attaches itself to the electricity bill, and every quarter, once an installation's occurred, it will be, this is how much energy you've used, so that's the standard stuff, you know, this is how much you've used, and Green Deal Finance. Green Deal Finance, so every year £200, and that's fixed because it's a loan. That loan just goes out year on year and gets paid over that process until such a time as it's paid off. If that customer leaves that property after 2 years, they don't take that finance agreement with them. It stays with that electricity meter, so it stays with the property. That's a good thing and a bad thing. Good for the customer that's leaving, not so good for the person that's potentially looking at buying a property, and that is an issue of the scheme. Many consumers have a concern whereby, well, I think we'd all be a little bit in that sort of band where we wouldn't necessarily want to buy into a property that's in essence got a legal charge against it, and that's what it will be, a figure that has to be paid throughout that journey. There is no getting away from that, and that could be seen as potentially a downside to the overall remit. I've mentioned it must pay for itself over the term of the loan based on the savings made by the installed measure. So what I mean by that is you can't offer a finance agreement that goes beyond the warranted life of a product. We can't have a situation where we're paying finance on something that's now broken and gone. So, you know, in that respect, the finance agreement must live within the life of the property. If it doesn't, then it doesn't meet the golden rule, and we can't have a Green Deal. And the only other thing to mention in terms of that overall financing is if there is a shortfall on the money, if there's not quite enough money in Green Deal to pay for the full installation of a measure, if there's £300 or £500 sort of sitting there that won't fit into that savings plan, the customer can actually contribute. So there is a situation where if there is a shortfall, the customer can pay a little bit extra to make that job go forward, which just makes sure that the whole thing operates. There's another part to this scheme. You've got Green Deal, which is this whole process of attaching finance to electricity meter and then the repayment. And then you've got something called ECO, the Energy Company Obligation, which runs in tandem with Green Deal. The fundamental difference with ECO is exactly the same scenario, the boiler that's not working and the energy performance certificate and the assessment. The difference is, depending on the eligibility of the householder, if the householder themselves are in receipt of eligible benefits, which are, for example, pension credit, working tax credit, family tax credit, a number of those varying eligible benefits, then it comes from a different pot. Energy companies have an obligation to pay out to the tune of £1.5 billion a year money to housing stock to raise the housing efficiency, the efficiency of property across the UK, and it's targeting people in fuel poverty, which is why it's using this eligibility criteria against pension credits and the like.
Did that change?
In what respect?
At the end of last year?
Yeah, it used to be something called Search and CESF and Warmfront, which has moved to ECO. I don't know if that's the.
No, I was told I had ECO on my house and I haven't paid.
And you haven't had to
pay anything, and I don't think.
I imagine, did you have purely like loft insulation or something like that?
External insulation.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, there are 3 standards to ECO, and on some particularly hard to treat properties, which ones that require external wall insulation, solid wall properties like yours will be, there are strands of eco funding that can target particular postcode areas. So if there are areas that are deemed to be within an area of
Otherwise, because that's going to ask me as well here, how do I go get that into my house? So in actual fact, it's supposed to be in that particular.
Yeah. There are areas which are regarded as socially. That's right. So yeah, and the Eco Fund is there to facilitate that. You can go. There's Ofgem guidance. So if you go to Ofgem, and rent to Eco. I'm more than happy to send you out the Ofgem Eco Guidance for Suppliers document. It's 156 pages long, but it's worth having a read of if you're really interested in moving forward with it. But in actual fact, the thing to do as a consumer interested in seeing whether you're eligible for Eco is to contact a Green Deal provider. And there are 114 Green Deal providers out there, and they will carry out a search on any given property and identify whether or not you fall within that target area. There's no question that between Green Deal and Eco, that Eco is where it's at. Green Deal, well, we've had 4 Green Deals occur, that's not great. Eco, thousands of jobs are happening, as you'd expect, because it's free at the point of use, so it's far more engaging and much easier to sell as something that's free. And both of those schemes run under a fundamental standard. The fundamental standard is past 2030. Past 2030 is the British standard that any business that delivers any of these schemes has to adhere to and be approved by in order to deliver such a thing. So at present, in actual fact, all Green Deal installers that are carrying out work are delivering Eco work, for instance, swapping boilers in eligible properties for consumers, which is free at the point of use. Very few installers are even looking at Green Deal at the moment, because until such a time as it's a proven working operating model, I think it makes sense for everybody to let the British Gases of the world and the large-scale PLCs of the world get the knocks off, get it operating, and then jump into that remit as and when it's working effectively. I should probably say, actually, feel free to ask questions as we go, else it will just be listening to me rattle on. The point of it all, the 2 fundamental points as I see it, there's lots of stats and statistics can be written to give you anything, but fundamentally we've got 2 things. Energy security, we're net importers of our energy in the UK, that's not ideal. We're buying in more stuff than we create ourselves. It makes absolute sense that we're more self-sufficient as an economy, that we create more of our own energy, which is things like fracking and nuclear and all the rest of that stuff. But it's also, we've got amongst the worst housing stock in the Western world. The efficiency of our housing stock is very bad. So the other thing that we need to do is use less. And part of the whole remit of using less is by having things like Green Deal and Eco to shift the wheels and get products and get properties more energy efficient without the need for customers to just spend that money. It's not glamorous spending money on cavity wall insulation. Very few people will go and change their boiler if it's working, just because it saves 20 quid a year, 30 quid. It's not something people do. You'd have a new kitchen or go on holiday. Whereas with schemes like this, it enables the properties to get better. The reason that that's important is that this isn't a government whim. It's based on core fundamental requirements at government level to ensure that we can get a sustainable economy and have more energy security for the future, so we don't have people that can turn off our taps and stop our gas and the rest of it. And the other is economic stimulus. Financiers can't lend money. Very few people, or a lot of people, can't get access to decent credit. So Eco and Green Deal start to shift those wheels economically. It puts money into the system. It allows boilers to be installed. It allows insulation projects to occur. That gets businesses operating. That gets consumers making things happen. It makes work activity happening in domestic dwellings and commercial dwellings, and it just shifts the wheels a bit. So it helps the whole economic structure start to shift a bit, hopefully. That's dropped off a little bit, but this is just a demonstration of how poor our housing stock is. And if you could see below here, you'd see that the remaining percentage is there. But all properties are gauged via an energy performance certificate on how thermally efficient they are. A being, in essence, carbon neutral, costing nothing to run, and then moving down that scale. And as you'll see, it goes out to G. And as you go down there, that's where most of the properties in the UK market live, at the bottom end. That's because we tend to keep our properties. We built them a long time ago, and we don't tend to knock them down. We still live in them. And I think 50% of the houses that we live in the next 10 years are already built. The vast majority of what we live in is already there, and it's poor. So what it means from an installer's perspective is this is a big target market. There are lots of rubbish properties that need to be upgraded. I'll just go through a few of these acronyms based on time and the rest of it. We've got a Green Deal provider. GDP is the Green Deal provider in Green Deal world. They are the project manager of the whole scheme. They hold the bags of cash, in essence. You have a Green Deal provider, and they've access to two great big bags of cash. This bag of cash is Green Deal money from the Green Deal Finance Company. So that's the money that works its way through the system and attaches itself to an electricity bill. And the other bag of cash is brokered money from the energy companies that is delivering eco work. And these Green Deal providers are the people that hold those bags of cash, and it's our installer networks, and like the networks that we're delivering here, we engage our installer members with Green Deal providers in order that they can access the bags of cash, so they can speak to their customers, find eligible customers, deliver the work and draw down the money from the Green Deal provider. Nobody can deliver work in Green Deal world without making friends with the Green Deal provider. They own that whole process. There are 114 of them currently in the UK, many of which are the usual suspects. So you've got your British Gases of the world and large-scale organisations that hold the key to the money for delivering that overall scheme. ECO I've mentioned, that's the energy company obligation. In essence, this money that they've got that they're spending, which is about £1.5 to £3 billion per year, they have to spend it. This isn't a case of, oh brilliant, we didn't have to spend all that money this year. They have to offload this money every year, and they're buying, in essence, carbon credits. We take out a rubbish boiler, we put a good one in, that creates a carbon saving. That carbon saving is being bought by the energy company, and that's what they're trading in. They're trading in carbon. Cesp and CERT schemes are the old schemes that used to run through ECO, and EEM is the energy efficient measure. So there are 45 different measures under Green Deal that can be installed, from boilers to draft excluders to light fittings, a huge amount of different measures, and any Green Deal installer has to hold the necessary qualifications and training regime against each of those measures in order that they can install it. I'm going to slip that slide because it's not really of interest to us. This will probably be more of your street, actually, some of this stuff, things like CMTCs and NOSs. I bet you kind of deal with all of this sort of stuff. So PAS 2030 as a standard carries national occupational standard and technical competence criteria against every single one of those measures. So any installation business must be assessed against each of those measures and meet the criteria, much like they would against an ACS scheme or any of those processes. They're inspected by a certification body, then they meet the requirement, now they've got their ticket to operate, and now they're a Green Deal installer. The DEA is a domestic energy assessor. That's the individual who carries out the energy performance certificate, and every Green Deal and every ECO starts with an energy performance certificate. It's the cornerstone of the whole process. We need that before we can move forward. I'm not going to go through that one. Some of these are sort of, I'm not suggesting that we're not in a place where you're not sort of technically proficient enough to know it, but some of this detail isn't really required. So in terms of the measures overall, it's split into 5 primary areas. We've got heat and vent, building fabric, lighting, water heating, and microgeneration. The harsh reality of Green Deal, and to some extent ECO, is that despite the fact that there are 45 measures and there are all these varying areas of work, the vast majority of funded work that will take place will be in heating and vent and building fabric, as in insulation and boilers. Much of the other stuff is unlikely to see the light of day, primarily under Green Deal because of the way the Golden Rule works. If you take microgeneration, that is to say renewable technologies, biomass and all this sort of installation, they're incredibly expensive to buy and install. And based on the Golden Rule, which is the cost of putting the thing in, has to be able to fit within a finance agreement over its warranted life. If you're putting in a £20,000 biomass piece of equipment over a 10-year process, it's got to save £2,000 every year for it to warrant getting into a Green Deal. So the fact of the matter is, we're unlikely to see it happen. It's a bit of a shame, really, particularly because it's called the Green Deal and it's not really very green, because renewable technologies don't really feature. In terms of breaking those down into their constituent parts, it covers every aspect of heat and vent, Condensing boilers is unquestionably a big opportunity for the heating market, and one of the primary reasons why we're developing this network and why there's a genuine hunger for moving forward with boilers, because heating businesses want that opportunity to deliver jobs. Building fabrics, so much like the insulation measures that you've done in your area, these are measures that can be installed under both Eco and Green Deal. Lighting fittings and lighting controls can also be installed, providing they bring enough energy efficient savings to warrant that Green Deal. Hot water systems and microgeneration, renewable technologies, which really will never really see Green Deal. The other side of it with renewables is that the vast majority of consumers that have renewable technology installed in their properties tend to be affluent people with money in the bank and are taking almost a lifestyle option to go from a standard boiler to a more sort of renewable source. Affluent people with money in the bank and access to disposable income are unlikely, well, first off, they're not going to be eligible for eco because they're not in receipt of benefits. And secondly, from a Green Deal perspective, one of the things that I didn't mention is that Green Deal comes with an interest rate of up to sort of 9% interest rate. It's not cheap finance. So somebody with money in the bank is unlikely to engage on that sort of finance agreement when, well, I've got money to pay for it. This is a certain section of society that doesn't necessarily have that financial wherewithal to jump in and have all that work activity carried out under their own steam. And a lot of the boiler installed under Green Deal, I suspect, will be born more out of distress purchase than just choice. The boiler's gone bang, it's not working, my radiators are cold, I've got no hot water, my kids are freezing cold, I've got no money in the bank, I can't get any credit and I need a new boiler. Then whether it's 9% or 30% interest rate is largely irrelevant. If Green Deal can bring it in and live within that finance agreement, then a consumer is likely to take that option, I would suggest. Past 2030 is the standard by which the whole scheme operates. So that's the standard which we do a huge amount of work with, and that's what we do a lot with the installation businesses such as the ones that we've seen today, and really helping a business understand how they run an effective quality management regime and how they run a bit more like a large-scale business. Do they have complaints procedures, non-conforming products procedures, technical publication libraries? They have to run a complete audit trail, and for a one-man band, that very often just isn't the way that sort of business operates, and clearly that's a requirement. If they want to be a past 2030 business, they need to move in that arena. So the Green Deal structure, as an overview, we've got the Department for Energy and Climate Change sitting at the top. Structurally, they own and run the whole scheme from a governmental department. We then have the Oversight Registration Body. This is operated by GemServe and REAL, two organisations that already run the renewable energy industry. It's the equivalent of Capita running the Gas Safe Register. It's the same process. Everybody who's involved in Green Deal is registered with this body. We've then got our standards layer, our regulatory layer, if you will, our past 2030 standards, so that's the standard to which an installer has to meet. With a Green Deal code of practice, it's a code of conduct talking about how we deal with a consumer, ensuring that we're not sitting on the customer sofa for 7 hours, beating them into submission and making them buy things from us that they shouldn't. So sales of goods, office and fair trading stuff, not driving them to the cash point and picking up the money and all that sort of thing. We've got UCAS, who I imagine you're familiar with, United Kingdom Accreditation Service, who create the regulatory blanket that provides it and police effectively the scheme and make sure everything's done appropriately, hopefully. And we've got certification bodies. There are a number of certification bodies that are able to provide the license. They're the driving examiner, in essence, in so much as an installer who wants to be a Green Deal approved installer contacts a certification body. The certification body comes out, has a look at their business. Let's have a look at your management structure. Let's have a look at an installation of work that you've carried out. Great, you've passed. They're then authorised, so advisors and installers can be certificated. Now I've got my ticket to operate. Now I can deliver Green Deal and Eco. Not yet. Now I come back to the Green Deal provider. I have to go make friends with the Green Deal provider because it's my provider that has access to the 2 pots of cash that we need to then deliver work activity through the scheme. I'm not really sure whether there's a huge amount else that we need to go through in terms of that journey. I don't know if you've got any questions relating to what we've gone through so far. I don't know whether you want to go through the standards and regulatory layers revolving around the consultation documentation related to the scheme. But
just a quick question about buying a house. Is there any obligation on the seller or the estate agents to declare what liabilities are attached?
Yeah, so it's still the case that an energy performance certificate has to be carried out, ready for selling a house, and any property that's had a green deal done, it shows on the energy performance certificate, and through the conveyancing and the solicitor side of the job, it's demonstrated to the potential buyer. I actually think that what's likely to happen on green deal jobs in that situation is that there'll be almost always an insistence that any outstanding green deal finance is conveyanced through the equity of the sale of the property, subject to equity being in the property. I imagine that that's the only way it will truly work. I'd be astounded if a consumer would buy a property with a charge on it. It just doesn't feel right, does it?
Can I ask a question? First Green Deal company went bust a few months ago.
It did.
How did they go bust then? The money is to be, if they're in essence a contract.
Because Enact Energy, who went bust for a significant amount of money, were a frontline business for Tesco's in essence, and their whole remit was about delivering Green Deal, and Green Deal's delivered 4 Green Deals. They're one of the few Green Deal providers that weren't brokering eco when you're delivering eco, because Tesco didn't feel it was within their demographic of footprint of types of consumers that they wanted to engage with. I guess they don't spend as much on groceries and stuff. So yeah, Enact, and there are a number of them that are really struggling because there are no green deals occurring. They've all invested millions into delivering Green Deal, and if it wasn't for the fact that the Green Deal providers can go onto the eco brokerage platform and draw down money and then deliver eco jobs, if it wasn't for that bit, many of these providers would be struggling right now. But a lot of providers have recognised that actually it's a sustainable business through eco on its own. If Green Deal comes and it starts to work, brilliant. You know, we can open up this bag of cash and we can start to deliver Green Deal as well. But in the meantime, we'll just run eco jobs and run that through the system and allow that business to grow. And from an installer point of view, they can deliver eco jobs and work in that premise. And as when and if Green Deal ever starts to shift, because they're already past 2030 approved companies, it will simply be a fact of Green Deal approved customers then starting to run through the system. They won't have to do anything different. It just opens that gate.
Can you tell us a bit more about the Green Deal providers? I know we've got some SMEs that they've done the training, but they can't get access. Their customers can't get access to that funding by the providers because their business is too small.
Yeah, and it's not so much that what a lot of small businesses want is they want providers to engage with them and start to do business with them, but no provider will talk to any installer unless they're Green Deal approved, and it's this chicken and egg thing. So they're saying, well, we don't, what is it that you're offering us? Because then I might get approved as a business, and I'll say, well, get approved as a business, and then we'll speak to you commercially. They're getting thousands of calls a day off a number of installer businesses. Every single provider lives on the oversight registration body, and there are contact details, web details, and registration documentation within this. We give this information to all of our network installers so they can have a chat with them. And I mean, for the heating market, the vast majority of small businesses are likely to engage with merchant groups, because all of the merchant providers, Plumbase, Plumb Centre, and all of these organisations are all Green Deal providers. And based on the fact that installers have a relationship with merchants already and they buy product from them already, many of them are likely to go down that route, I think, with a provider. But very few will get any real dialogue with a provider. And the minute an installer is certificated and exists on here, they receive an absolute, they're awash with commercial offers from providers, because at their contact team level, much like any business, they go and check this on a daily basis, find new entrants to the scheme and send them information. Would you like to deliver Green Deal? Because they want businesses to do it, because they can draw money, eco money, to keep a little bit for themselves, earn margin and create an army of installers. But it is a challenge that for a small company.
Andy, what role does your organisation have?
Sorry?
What role does your organisation have?
So I guess we would regard ourselves as experts in compliance related to renewables past 2030 and the like. So from a network perspective, we're I guess you call us the driving instructors for installers. So we give them the skills that they need to move forward and get themselves ready for certification for past 2030. We give them a management system that they can operate. We maintain a technical publication library for them. So by creating an infrastructure that a small business can operate with, policies and procedures, a huge part of all of this. If you've ever heard of something like ISO 9001 and this sort of remit, a small business is never going to sit down and write a 300-page policy and procedure document in terms of the way they conduct their business. So we generically put a lot of that information together as a sort of supporting infrastructure. We still then need to train each of these network installers to make sure that they're adhering to those policies and procedures. But and that's the network perspective really. What our role in this is, by doing things once and then spreading it and cascading it through lots and lots of installers, it's better that we just do something once and pass it to lots of people than lots of people have to do it lots and lots of times. So we deliver that expertise, and we're running seminars all over the UK, or I am, talking about this stuff, everywhere, and the take-up's been really good, because there's a large interest in energy company obligation. The reason for the large interest from small businesses at the moment, those who aren't approved are getting a situation where they're visiting their customers and their customers are saying, actually, I'm eligible under ECO, can you do it? They can't, and they lose the customer. So many of them are finding that they actually can't afford not to be delivering it. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for your time, everybody. Hopefully it wasn't too boring. And I think we're about done, are we?
Helen Reed's just typing a message.
Oh, is she?
It's very good, thank you.
Yeah, that's better, isn't it? Could have gone either way. I thought it was going to be a question. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for attending, guys. Yeah, no worries.
What about the investment?